Guard of Honour provided by the 1st Battalion Royal Tasmanian Regiment prior to the opening of the first session of the 35th Parliament in Tasmania.
Mr. President and honourable members of the Legislative Council, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, we meet today to commence the first session of a new Parliament. I take the opportunity this occasion provides to express to the people of Tasmania appreciation of the warm welcome extended to both my wife and myself since I assumed the office of Her Majesty's representative in this state. We have all received with pleasure the announcement that Her Majesty and His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh will visit Australia next year and will be in Tasmania for a brief period. In accordance with its determination to preserve the rights and freedom of the individual, my government will make provision for the appointment of a citizen's defender and will introduce legislation to set up a joint standing committee on subordinate legislation. The recent floods in northern Tasmania have caused considerable damage and personal loss. My government will assist those people who have suffered material losses by way of cash grants. Early consideration will be given to the measures necessary to extend effective and practical protection to consumers against inferior goods and services. The establishment of a Consumers Protection Council is expected to be a central feature of the required legislation. My government is determined to make Tasmanian roads safe and to deal effectively with dangerous, reckless and careless drivers who imperil the lives of responsible road users. Ministers are gravely concerned about this effect of alcohol on driving abilities, and more severe penalties will be imposed on persons convicted of driving while significantly affected by alcohol. A points demerit system will be introduced as soon as practicable. The aim of the points system is to remove potentially lethal drivers from the roads. Opportunities will be given for those who reach a certain number of points to improve their driving. Regular vehicle inspections, reflectorized number plates, and other measures will be introduced as is practicable. A committee is being set up to implement the provisions of private and intermediate beds in public hospital. It is intended to investigate the establishment of paramedical training schools in physiotherapy, speech therapy, and occupational therapy in Tasmania. The demand for government-built homes is increasing, and my government will continue to assist the people of Tasmania to obtain housing assistance by providing good homes at a reasonable cost. Housing the aged, and in particular widows with little or no financial resources, is important. My government intends to provide more accommodation for this class of applicant. Housing department rents will not be increased during the life of this Parliament, and continuous surveys will be made to ensure that construction costs are kept to a minimum. Arrangements will be made by the Housing Department for purchasers to obtain an insurance policy to cover the balance owing to the department in the event of the death of the main breadwinner. In the case of the majority of purchasers, that is, those under 35 years of age, this will be without additional charges being made in the weekly repayments to the department until after reaching that age. The Homes Act will be reviewed and, if necessary, legislation will be introduced to streamline the activities of the department. People will be encouraged to build homes on sites of their own selection and to their own design. The best possible measure of funds available under the housing agreement will be channeled to such home seekers through additional lenders under the scheme, that is, the cooperative housing societies and the agricultural bank. Planning is proceeding for a matriculation college on the eastern shore of the Derwent, a high school at Geilston Bay, and primary schools at Scottsdale, East Wynyard, and Smithton. Design work is also in hand for a new technical college at Burney. New primary schools to be built at Meandetta, Devonport, and Hilton Road, Claremont, will feature an advanced design incorporating experimental classrooms. A contract has been let for the erection of the first phase of the College of Advanced Education at Mount Nelson. The physical working conditions of teachers will be closely examined with a view to improvement through the provision of such amenities as staff rooms, study areas, and alike facilities. After establishing priorities, these improvements will be effected progressively over the next 3 years. The granting of funds by the Commonwealth for school libraries has made possible a program of work for improved library facilities at Wynyard, Warrane, and Parklands High Schools and the Launceston Matriculation College. In addition, state funds will be increased to allow the distribution of larger sums of money to schools for library purposes, and the present system of dollar-for-dollar subsidies will be abandoned in favor of direct grants. To reduce the cost of schooling to parents, arrangements are being made to introduce book hire schemes into a number of high schools at the beginning of 1970. Each scheme will be assisted financially in its initial stages. Further schemes will be introduced progressively until all schools have been able to take advantage of this form of assistance. More parents are expected to qualify for the school's board and matriculation allowances following the proposed amendment to the means tests now applicable to these allowances. The needs of non-state schools have been recognized, and legislation is to be introduced to increase capitation grants. My ministers will seek balanced development of the state's industries to provide the employment opportunities necessary to ensure the expansion of the population and to avoid the drift of young people to employment in other states. Accordingly, a vigorous campaign will be launched to attract new industries and to encourage the expansion of existing industries. Satisfactory progress is being made in all phases of the Hydroelectric Commission's developmental program. The commissioning of the first power stations in the Mersey Forth development, Rowallan and Lemonthine, marks the commencement of the exploitation of an entirely new catchment area in the northwest of the state. As, in turn, the other power stations in the valley of the Forth are brought into service, the value of the storage and the runoff from this catchment will be correspondingly increased. It is expected that the third power station in the Mersey Forth power development, Devil's Gate, will be commissioned next August. The Commission's first thermal power station, Bell Bay, is scheduled to be in service by October 1970, when it will add to the system 120,000 kilowatts of generating capacity, which will be independent of variations in the rainfall. In the Gordon River Power Development, Stage 1, good progress is being made. The scheduled commissioning date for the Gordon Power Station is 1975. My government is deeply concerned at the large deficit of the Consolidated Revenue Fund. It will undertake a complete review of the state's finances in an attempt to correct this position. Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, during this session, you will be asked to grant sufficient supply for continuation of the normal services of government in respect of the Consolidated Revenue Fund and the Loan Fund, pending the passing of the respective appropriation acts for the financial year 1969-70. Mr. President and honourable members of the Legislative Council, Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Assembly, legislation will be introduced as soon as possible to change the present superannuation arrangements for state employees. There will be an entirely different scheme which will break new ground in this field. In determining the principles of the new scheme, my government has had the benefit of advice from the Commonwealth Actuary. It is proposed to extend to hospital employees entitlement to allowances under the Public Servants Retiring and Death Allowances Act, 1925. The Wages Board Act will be revised, and it is expected that the recommendations of an advisory committee of employer and employee representatives will be the basis of that revision. The recommendations of the Legislative Council Select Committee on the Workers' Compensation Bill 1967 will receive early consideration with a view to the introduction of fresh legislation. A proposal for the introduction of a special long service leave scheme for casual workers in the building industry will be examined and, if practicable, will be the subject of new legislation. Because of the increasing need for close cooperation between the government and primary producers, both in regard to legislation and the general problems and needs of the industry, my government will establish an advisory council comprising representatives of all major branches of primary production. It is proposed to expand and intensify the research being undertaken by the Department of Agriculture in the interests of the farming community of the state. The operations of the Advisory Research Committee, already established, will be continued. A committee of inquiry will be constituted to examine all aspects of the dairy industry in this state. One of the terms of reference will be to study the desirability or otherwise of having one state authority to administer the industry. My government will negotiate with recognized agricultural colleges on the mainland in an endeavour to gain enrolment for a greater number of young Tasmanians to undertake agricultural diploma courses. It is possible that legislation will have to be introduced in this state following a decision by the Commonwealth Government to establish a wheat quota for Tasmanian growers. The economic stability of the fruit export industry will be critically examined, as well as the ability of the fruit grower to compete satisfactorily on traditional world markets. The survey of arable vegetable production areas in northern Tasmania will be stepped up, and all factors limiting further expansion in the production of processing vegetable crops will be investigated. It is my government's intention substantially to increase allocations of funds to the Agricultural Bank for assistance to primary producers. Such assistance will be by way of loans to help with the purchase of properties, for general farm needs, and for settlement under the Closer Settlement Act. Close attention will be given to the development and protection of the sea fisheries of the state. A start has been made with the operational planning of pulpwood production for the supply of wood chips to Japan from the East Coast. A vigorous public works program of road and bridge development will be pursued by my government, which will also maintain a high level of assistance to municipal councils for road works. Consideration is being given to the introduction of legislation to provide more effective control over the use of water for irrigation and for industrial and domestic purposes. A tourist development authority will be established and will be charged with the active promotion of the tourist industry. Consideration will be given to the provision of assistance to local government or other authorities undertaking the development of local tourist features. Legislation will be introduced to amend the Companies Act to make disclosures relating to shareholdings compulsory, to regulate takeover bids, and to remove the principal evils in the manipulation of shares. The Evidence Act will be amended to permit the reception by judicial tribunals of documents reproduced on microfilm. Other legislative proposals emanating from the Standing Committee of Attorneys General will be introduced from time to time. Measures to be brought before you will include Constitution Bill, Education Bill, Superannuation Bill, and Tasmanian Orchestra Continuation Bill. May the guidance of divine providence attend your deliberations. I now declare the session open.